Looking for ways to stay active this fall? Connectra has got you covered. Check out our Abilities dance, chair yoga, and adaptive fitness classes on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Go to connectra.org/events to learn more and add some movement into your weekly routine.
This podcast is brought to you by Reimagine Radio, the online radio station that aims to give you information on disability and music. My name's Graham Wyman, and I'm the program manager at the Disability Foundation. Today, I am joined by Tanya Tejassvi from SPARCBC, as well as the program coordinator for the Vancouver Adapted Music Society, Bryden Vino.
Thank you. Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to the podcast. My name is Tanya Tejassvi, and I manage accessibility initiatives at SPARCBC. SPARC is also known as the Social Planning and Research Council of British Columbia. I bring in a data analysis and mapping experience, and a lot of my work revolves around community-based initiatives around accessibility, accessible parking, and overall accessibility in the communities.
Nice. And thanks, Graham, for the introduction, saying hi to me too. It's great to meet you, Tanya. I'm really excited to kind of learn a bit more about SPARC today and kind of what you bring to the table there. So maybe I can kind of start with the first question for today. That's cool with everyone. So I was kind of going through the website and getting acquainted with SPARC and seeing what everyone has access to in order to see what SPARC does. So what are SPARCBC's, 5 key principles and values? What do they kind of do to help our community?
Well, thank you for the first question. So the 5 key principles and the values are, closely tied to the work that we do. The 5 key principles would be equity, social inclusion, security, adaptability, and equality. We know that at times society can be unequal and that people with disabilities are more likely to experience multiple barriers to inclusion. So these principles and values have guided SPARCBC's work for almost 6 decades. In practice, this is about inclusive communities, accessible parking, and a lot of other projects that we do. In fact, SPARC is best known for its role around the development and delivery of parking permit program for people with disabilities across BC since 1984. This program allows us to assist almost 50,000 people every year to lead their rightfully independent lives. So I would say our principles and values are tightly tied to all the work that we do, and we are committed to a just and healthy society, and we do advocate for equality, fairness, and dignity for all.
Now, Tanya, the Disability Foundation is focusing on accessible parking for International Persons with Disabilities Day, which SPARC has a huge part in. What are some of the things that the public doesn't understand about accessible parking?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would love to answer that. At SPARC, as much as we advocate for increase in the need of designated accessible parking, there's a great deal of education and awareness still required for the use of existing parking spaces. Right. Use of existing accessible parking spaces. To do this well, it is all about working with communities, making sure the voice of people with disabilities is heard, and that as a society, we all develop a deeper understanding of this need. I joined SPARC almost a year ago, and every day I see it as a privilege to work with the people we serve and to try to create real and lasting positive change in our communities, whether that's creating new parking or working on issues around enforcement. So coming back to your question around what the public does not understand, we have an active misuse and enforcement helpline, which has been receiving numerous calls regarding misuse of accessible parking spaces. So I'll be very straightforward with the few things that people really need to understand about. So if we talk of public, I'll divide them into 2 categories. One would be permit holders and one would be non-permit holders. So for non-permit holders, there's just one thing they need to understand, which is please do not use the accessible parking spaces. These are designed and placed closer to the entrance of a building for a reason. That reason is not just saving time. So the next time you think you'll be back in 5 minutes and you park close to the building, but using an accessible parking space, please remember that someone else who needs that space more than you might have had to drive back home because they could not get or enter the building. It is also as much about safety and making sure that someone in a wheelchair can get across a parking lot safely. In fact, this is one of the major drivers when the program was first started. So as a result, one of the things I've been working on this year is a design charrette with the city of Vancouver, where we are trying to find what it takes to design, create truly accessible spaces, especially van accessible. For sure, we do not have enough van accessible parking. And coming back to the second category, which is the permit holders, we know most of them abide by the rules of the permit and are careful and vigilant. But for a few, we hope that they would understand a few things. You should be displaying the parking permit only, you should be parked in the accessible parking space only when you need to exit or enter the vehicle. If you plan on staying back in the vehicle and someone else is driving or getting out of the vehicle for you, please consider using the non-accessible parking space. And if a permit holder is not traveling in the vehicle at all, then it would be an offense if somebody else displayed the parking permit other than the permit holder himself or herself. Yeah.
Okay, and just touching up on something you mentioned, how would someone report an incident to Spark?
Oh, so right now we have one helpline, which is 604-718-7734.
So kind of moving a little further from just specifically parking and kind of opening it up to just accessibility in general. So this was before you started with Spark, but in 2017, Spark was involved in an accessibility audit for music venues in Vancouver. This was initiated by Real Wheels, actually. So what are some things that are looked for when assessing accessibility? Maybe sometimes, more than just music venues.
I might not have been part of it, but I know that Spark has conducted accessibility audits for a range of indoor and outdoor facilities. Though it is difficult to summarize this into a few sentences, but I know that accessibility goes beyond mobility. And therefore, we have adopted a very comprehensive definition and approach when conducting audits. We try to ensure that our work is guided by the principles of universal design and also abide by the United Nations guiding principles of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. There are very important details which are technical in nature related to each audit, as well as a subjective user experience. So we're very lucky to have innovators like Rick Hansen working in this space. Apart from that, we genuinely support the motto, nothing about us without us. And our accessibility audit team includes people with lived experience. As it is much about getting the technical details right, it is also about working towards true inclusion. So we have a team of people. We go and verify the technical details and also take the survey or get somebody to test from a person with a lived experience so that we really know what it means when the space is truly and inclusively created.
Gotcha. That's very interesting. And Tanya, you mentioned Rick Hansen, the foundation. Now, SPARCBC often partners with other organizations for various campaigns or workshops. Why collaborate with diverse group of organizations?
I think we at Spark, we truly believe that this is a mission-driven work. And in this work of, working towards truly accessible, inclusive communities, we think there is enough room for all of us to work together. So, alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. Our important factor is to provide a common voice to accessibility so that multiple organizations aim towards common goals, which I think in the end is more impactful and helps derive meaningful results.
Nice. Yeah. Um, so you kind of talked about this whole how everyone benefits from it and kind of exactly what's going down. Initiatives mean to you as someone that, works every day in the field?
Um, I've likely covered a lot of this already, but for me, it is important to also take in evidence-based approach. So when I go through the stats, as per the Canadian Disability Survey, it is important to know that 1 in 5, that is 22% of Canadians aged 15 and over, or about 6.2 million individuals, they have one or more disabilities. We would have these stats for province-wide, various provinces as well. What this tells me is that the work we do is making real difference for this lot of people, right? So we often try to connect with our permit holders and find ways to hear their thoughts and opinions on accessible parking, and we really try to make it work for communities within BC. We have an initiative called Your Ideas, and that was likely one of the first projects I worked for. It was going through the whole survey responses, and it was amazing to know from every different nook and corner of BC, hearing about different opinions, what's going well, what's going bad, about different things about accessibility. So it's not just accessible parking spaces. Sometimes people say that, oh, the space is right, but I cannot reach the entrance because there's no curb ramp or there's no accessible aisle. So we learn a lot from our permit holders, both good and bad, and both in terms of what communities should be doing to get it right. And this is a shout out to all the communities who are already doing it right, but when some of them are still getting it wrong. So this feedback also guides our work in addressing issues of misuse and abuse for accessible parking spaces as and when they arise. And it gives us an opportunity, and I am really grateful for it, to express our appreciation to local governments when they get it right. We are also working with, for example, BC Parks to look at real ways to advance these types of conversations.
Right. Now, Tanya, it's obvious that you're very passionate about the work you do with Spark. Do you have any memorable moments from a specific Spark campaign or program? And why might that be memorable for you?
Wow, I've been waiting to talk about this project. So this one was called Accessible or Not.
Okay.
So we at Spark, we try to have conversations with different disability serving organizations, and so that the common voice or the common goal of accessibility is achieved. So through one of these discussions, a idea was conceived called making a video about how spaces do not work for some people. Mm-hmm. So we call it accessible or not. Like we'll go and test out a space and see what's wrong with it, right? Through a lived experience, like they show us what's well or not. And when it started, it seemed like a very difficult project because I personally had no video filming experience. I come from a different data and IT related background. So, but it was amazing. We had David Ediger from Creative Designs working for us, and he helped us create the whole video. So it was a wonderful project. We brought together participants from various disability serving organizations, committees, and they have lived experience. And we invited people with different combinations of mobility. Mm-hmm. So the vans were different, so the kind of vehicle they used were different. And then we created a video in which each participant is enacting or trying to show an issue or constraint with designated accessible parking spaces. We filmed in 2 locations, and it came out beautifully. And in the end, it was shared across organizations, and so many people reached out for feedback. The best was from a school teacher saying that, wow, this is a great project that we can showcase with students to make them aware about accessible parking spaces. Mm-hmm. So I think everyone who would view this video gets educated about the purpose and use of accessible spaces, and maybe it makes them more considerate about the needs of people with disabilities.
Now, one last question that just came into my mind while we were speaking, Tanya, would be around what do you hope comes from the collaboration between the Disability Foundation and Spark for December 3rd?
Well, I'm hoping that now since we've been working towards accessible parking, and it forms, like a comprehensive approach, like
Mm-hmm.
taking parking, but making it one way to reach towards accessible communities. So more talks about transportation, entrances of the buildings,
Mm-hmm.
various other aspects that, if somebody started a day and okay, they got an accessible parking spot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then they have everything to go through their day with ease and comfort. So this would spark a important conversation about truly and wholly inclusive communities. And yes, if misuse and enforcement is being addressed, I think it should be taken up at a broader with a broader audience, and people might just get a little more education around it.
Yeah, no, full-heartedly agree. Well, Tanya, it's been a pleasure to speak to you today. Thank you for joining us on Discover Stories for Reimagine Radio, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Tanya. Appreciate it.